Well, actually, they're all a series. I write,
Okay.
yeah, all the books are written in a deliberate sequence. The order doesn't look like it, but they're all written to be in a certain sequence, and they're all written to dovetail each to the other. But within that overarching series, yeah, there's several kind of little sub-series of books in it, yeah.
Excellent, excellent.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead, Mark. I know. Sorry.
was the name of your website? That was the name of one of your books, correct? That
Yeah.
that wasn't your first book, though.
Actually, the first book was a book called The Giza Death Star, and
Oh, okay. It was okay.
yeah, and there's actually three books in that little kind of mini series. It's The Giza Death Star, The Giza Death Star Deployed, and then The Giza Death Star Destroyed. And when I finally decided to do a website, I just decided to name it after those books that kind of kicked off the whole series.
Okay, makes sense.
So,
And go ahead.
as of right now, what are your top interests right now that you're researching?
Well, I don't generally comment on what I'm researching at any given moment because
Okay.
the reason why is I put a lot of work in my books, and I really don't like to be scooped, you know.
Mhm.
So I generally hold all that very close to the chest until I actually get a book manuscript. When I know it's at the printer, then I usually tell people what the next book is going to be and what the title is and so on. I can generally indicate that my coming areas of inquiry are going to be related again to banking and finance. They're going to be related to the connection between consciousness and physics, and I'm going to be doing something on Nazis once again. So I'm doing kind of three different areas all at the same time right now.
Nice.
And all, or at least a couple subjects that you have touched on in the past. You've certainly done a wide variety of different subjects and material. Do you have a favorite? Do you have like a one thing that sticks out the most, or whatever, that you focus on the most?
In all of those books, there's two or three themes that kind of unite them all. One of them is this connection between consciousness and physics. It's something that in some of my books I've referred to as the topological metaphor of the medium, because I happen to think that if one peels away the metaphysical and philosophical language of a lot of philosophical and ancient religious texts, what you're looking at, if you look at the structure of it, what you're looking at is a metaphor that's profoundly mathematical in nature. And I think, just to be country simple about it, I think that this comes from high antiquity, and that it probably entered a period of decline where the only way to talk about it was through the language of religion and philosophical metaphysics. That's one theme. The other theme that is kind of a consistent runner through the books is the struggle between good and evil, and more particularly the struggle between good elites and bad elites. That's certainly something that I picked up very early in the Giza Death Star series, and that really follows through all of the books. The third one is rather obvious is I spend a lot of time in my books pointing out that the Third Reich, in my opinion, quite literally attempted to revive or restore or to uncover some of that ancient thinking and ancient science. So yeah, the Nazi theme is certainly one of the. It's a favorite theme of mine, but not in the sense that I like Nazis or anything. I just.
No, I understand.
Know your enemy.
Yeah, know your enemy. Thank you.
Right.
Because I do think people are under an extraordinary degree of misapprehension about the importance of that period of human history and the even more astonishing story of how they did not go quietly into the night, but took some long-term steps to ensure the survival of their ideology and pardon me, and some of their scientific projects after the war. I think that's a hugely crucial story, and it's one that impacts in a major fashion the post-war financial structure of the West, and that's another part of the story that people don't like to talk about, but I don't think you can adequately understand what's going on without that component.
Right.
Another meme that I've been pursuing in the book, in the various books, is this idea of not only have you had throughout human history hidden elites, but those elites most always are connected to secretive financial activity and secretive technological activity at one and the same time. So those are kind of the four areas that if people read all the books, they'll discover those themes popping up over and over again.
Okay. So Joseph, we're talking about here, I guess, the topic of Nazis are coming up now, so I got to ask this. And we were talking about Mars earlier, so it brought to mind. Now, first off, have you ever seen that interview? It was with David Icke and Arizona Wilder.
No.
Okay. Well, she claims to be a victim of abuse of, I guess, ritualistic abuse and mind control and all that stuff or whatever. And
right.
In it, she claims that the Aryans came from Mars a long time ago, and that the reptiles followed them here, and they actually require the blood of the Aryans, which are supposedly from Mars, to keep their shape. And I thought that was kind of unusual, but I also thought it was interesting because if you look at like what you say with the Nazis, with Hitler and all, he wanted to make it so everybody had Aryan blood in them, blonde hair, blue eyes. So to me, that all made sense. I don't know.
Well, I'm not a big follower nor subscriber to Mr. Icke's ideas. As for rings of ritual abuse and mind control, there's no doubt in my mind that those rings are there, and I happen personally to think that the network is probably of global extent for various reasons, but thus far I haven't commented much in public on it because I haven't researched the topic sufficiently to have anything new to say other than what other people have said out there. I'd be very wary of really radical hypotheses. Now that said, it's interesting if you go to the Zulu tribe in South Africa, their own tribal myths indicate, and I believe I mentioned this in Cosmic War and perhaps Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men. It was one other book. I don't remember which one right off the top of my head. But in their tribal myths, they very clearly state that ultimately they came from Mars, which kind of throws a cocked hat into the Aryan story because, of course, the Zulus are black. but they claim that their tribe came to Mars on ships, or came to Earth from Mars on ships. There's no two ways to get around it. I do think there's something odd about the connection of Mars in the human imagination, that it should so consistently be present in human thought all the way from Greece to Rome and other cultures, and in every case the association of Mars, even back in Mesopotamia, the association of the planet to war and to
right.
Conquest and things of that sort. It's a fairly universal meme. The question is, why is it there? And it's interesting, Hoagland at one point in his earlier researches would often make the statement, we may well find out that we are the Martians. And I think there's a little bit of evidence to suggest that fact. For one thing, the human circadian rhythm seems to be more adapted to a Martian environment than to an earthly one. But, just little odd things like that. But beyond that, I can't really speculate. I don't know. There's certainly the presence of Mars in human lore that has yet, in my opinion, to be adequately explained.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Ike. Don't really follow him that well, right? But that was a very interesting interview. And if any of the listeners want to have nightmares tonight, you can go ahead and seriously search. The title of the interview was called "Interview with a Mother Goddess." I believe that's what it was called. Oh no, I'm sorry. It was called "Revelations of a Mother Goddess." It was called Revelations of a Mother Goddess. Yeah. That was scary. That was, I wouldn't suggest watching it before you go to sleep. Seriously. No, I posted on Facebook that I had a dream the other night where Mark Dice was at my house and he was like trying to steal something of mine. Something that I was going to like make a video or something. He was gonna. And I kept trying. I was like battling him for a couple hours, and then I caught him in a bunch of rope and tied him up, and he broke free of it, and he turned into a reptile.
Well, I suggest you not undergo Jungian psychotherapy for that dream.
Oh no, I wasn't scared in my dream. I mean, I wasn't. I woke up a little bit after, but. I don't really get scared when monsters, attack me in my dreams anymore. I usually beat them up. Which is great. No more fear of dreams. So giants.
Right.
I would love to talk about giants. We got into it a little bit with John B. Wells on the last show. And, but we didn't get too deep into it because we covered so much with him on the show. But this is a great time to get into it.
Okay.
Well, what do you want to know?
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
Are they actually the offspring of fallen angels, or is that just a metaphor to make them sound more mysterious and powerful than what they might just, or are they just the offspring of aliens who would like to consider themselves gods?
Well, I think it's a bit of all of them. My own approach has always been with those stories to assume that if you look at some of those Mesopotamian texts in particular, one set of texts is called the Karsag tablets, Kharsag. They were published by Yale University Press under the title Miscellaneous Babylonian Texts. The scholar that published them was a fellow by the name of William Barton. I have a copy of that, and it's the texts are in so-so condition. There are major portions of the tablets that were missing when he published his translation and photographs of them. But if you look at them, the people that did kind of the most close examination of those texts from this alternative research point of view were Christopher and I think Mary was his wife's name, O'Brien, in a book called The Genius of the Few that I reviewed in Giza, Giants, Monsters, and Men. It's really a rather astonishing book. It costs an arm and a leg, but in my opinion, it's worth every penny. And what they do is they go through the text very carefully and point out that certain allusions in the text are probably describing some sort of technology that you would be using for gene splicing and genetic engineering. They're reading of one particular portion of the text that talks about the something, if I'm paraphrasing from poor memory here, something the seeing eye or the light eye or something like this, and in their reconstruction they think this is a microscope. Well, certainly a microscope would be a technology that you'd want to have if you're going to do genetic engineering, but it sounds to me more like it may be a gene sequencer, which uses, of course, spectrography and other things to read genetic code. But it's clear from the text that you're dealing with a story of genetic engineering of man. So my assumption has always been that when you're dealing with those stories, first of all, to make the genetic engineering easy, what you're probably dealing with is another branch of the human species or the human genus. So in other words, we may have genetic cousins out there that look a great deal like us, and that would have made the process of engineering some sort of chimerical offspring much easier. The interesting thing that I pointed out in Giza, Giants, Monsters, and Men is that in the Karsag tablets, what you have is 14 human donor mothers and one male, quote-unquote, God donor on the God side of the equation that create and manipulate modern man into existence. Now, that's interesting because if you look at some of the recent genetic research that's been conducted in trying to describe the historical evolution of human haplogroups, the work of Brian Sykes pointed out that you have 13 parent female haplogroups within humanity. Those in turn which come from a common human mother that they assume to be kind of a mitochondrial Eve, all right? And one male donor. Now, the problem more recently in genetics, in other words, you have slight, very, very loose corroboration of that particular ancient story right there. But there's another more amazing one. If you look at what geneticists are saying right now about the origins of humanity, they're saying that modern Homo sapiens sapiens originated sometime circa 150,000 years ago. That's as early as they've been able to date mitochondrial Eve, in other words, the common genetic mother that we all share. But when they look at the Y chromosome in human males, they're now talking about Y chromosomal Adam as being almost 150,000 years older than the emergence of modern man. So, take that for whatever that's worth. But that's an interesting thing in itself because that would place the origins of Y chromosomal Adam somewhere around 250,000 years ago, give or take a few thousand years. Now that to me is very interesting in and of itself, because it looks like another very, very loose corroboration of some of those ancient stories. And the ancient story that I'm thinking about in particular is the so-called Sumerian Kings List, which, if you read it, dates the beginning when kingship descended from heaven, is the way they put it,
right,
to circa 243,000 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So, in other words, while academics were busily dismissing, philologists and so on were busily dismissing the Sumerian Kings List as a bit of wild Mesopotamian science fiction, modern genetics appears to be giving us these little weird little clues,
right,
that maybe it's not so wild after all. We don't really know, but I just find that very interesting corroboration of a very loose sort of some of those ancient texts.
Wow, so that would date Sumeria a lot farther back than 7,000 years ago.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's always been my suspicion, because let's be honest, the academic paradigm is that modern man has been around for about 150,000 years, and for about 140,000 years of it, all we were doing was hunting and gathering.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, we decided to quit hunting and gathering and build these
societies,
these immense civilizations like Sumer and Egypt and the Indus Valley. And moreover, when we decided to do that, all of a sudden, and for no good reason, we decided to invent mathematics and agriculture and animal domestication. And,
right.
Out
of nowhere, it just happened.
Out of thin air, So the assumption, of that paradigm to me is just highly suspect. These societies themselves, Egypt in particular, always refer to themselves as legacies of something that occurred much earlier than them. So in other words, they're telling you that they're declined legacies of a much higher civilization that pre-existed them. The problem being, well, where is it and what was it, But I think there's enough indications on planet Earth that something was here of a technologically sophisticated sort, predating those civilizations. I mean, my word, look at the ruins of Pumupunku that I talk about in Jeeves, Giants, Monsters, and Men. The ruins themselves are usually dated by various people between 10,000 and 30,000 years ago. And you look at the stones that are machined there, the great big H blocks, they're not only machined and they're not only gigantic, but they're machined with an extraordinary precision that implies that they had some sort of technology that went way beyond the Incas. So, So yeah, there's indications of this all over the world. So yeah, I think if you keep an open mind, you have to look at all this evidence and conclude that there's some sort of connection between that activity and then what happens to spring up rather suddenly in Mesopotamia and Egypt.
Okay. So what's your take on the whole hybrid bloodline? Like the as you would, the quote unquote elite, as it's claimed that they have alien DNA in them and etc.
Well, it's complicated because by elite I'm assuming you mean the Western elite. And the problem, and don't get me wrong, I set out when I started researching Jeeves, Giants, Monsters, and Men, my working hypothesis was that the elites are looking for some sort of modern genetic confirmation of all of these ancient stories, number one, and number two, are possibly looking for confirmation that they may carry some of that non-human or non-terrestrial DNA. All right. Now, I was able to verify the first more or less because I just pointed out you have the modern geneticists coming up with these odd, loose corroborations of some of these ancient stories. I was not able to find any direct confirmation of the second hypothesis, The problem, as far as modern genetics goes, for the elite bloodline white supremacy hypothesis, is that the Caucasian race, oddly enough, emerges more or less late in the game in terms of the emergence of human haplogroups. The black race is much older. Orientals are older. And the white race, in addition to its rather late emergence, seems to be the most bastardized of them all. So, the idea of genetic purity, in that sense, kind of goes out the window. I mean, it's anything but. But the odd thing there again is you look at, and I'll be honest with you guys, I've been looking and looking and looking for an answer to this one, and I can't really find anybody that explains it satisfactorily. If you look at the Caucasian peoples, basically the European peoples, oddly enough, they have the most problems with Rh negative blood and things like that. Other human populations don't have near the problems with that. You have yet another mutation occurring somewhere around the Black Sea that introduces blue eyes into the European stock. And on top of all of that, being the youngest of and most mixed in terms of its genetic composition, the most mixed of human races, by the same odd token, and even more weirdly, the Caucasian race appears to have the oldest of the blood types of the human race, the 4 blood types. So racially the youngest, blood types the oldest. What does this mean?
That is very strange.
It's very, very strange. How do you explain this on a standard Darwinian model? And I got to be honest with you guys, I've looked and I've looked and I've looked. Maybe I'm not looking in the right places. That's always a possibility. But I haven't found anyone that's willing to go there, and I just don't know what to make of that either. So I do think, all my suspicion is I do think that they are looking for some sort of genetic confirmation of these ancient stories. Everything that I've researched, and I even put a bit about it in this last book that just came out, everything tells me that they are, but I haven't found anything of a scientific or genetic nature to confirm that hunch yet.
So you suspect? So what is your suspicions? I don't want you to speculate and throw it out there, but
well, my suspicion, quite frankly, is that those ancient stories have truth in them. That there's some possibility of the external and deliberate manipulation of the human species. Toward what end? I'm not really certain. The ancient stories are all the way from Mesopotamia to Plato and to the Bible and to some of the Mesopotamian texts, even the Egyptian texts kind of hint at it, that when the gods or whoever created man, they initially created man far too intellectually capable that mankind quickly became a threat to the power of whoever made mankind. So they had to go back in. Yeah, they had to go back in and retinker with mankind to dumb him down.
Of course. I think they went too far on that.
Yeah, well, that may be true too. Yeah, there's quite a lot of evidence in history for that.
We need an update.
They went a little too far on the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So, I remember, I don't know where I heard this before. I'm hoping you can correct me here, or at least from my perspective. Okay, so the giants, the Nephilim or whatever, when they were first here, they caused a lot of ruckus back in the day, and they were eating people and going crazy and destroying stuff. and then supposedly this is how I know it. And then there was that giant flood that killed everybody just so they could kill the giants. And supposedly the souls of the giants, they weren't allowed to reincarnate, and the souls of the giants are now on another dimension, and they're tormenting people, and that's what people refer to as demons now, the souls of those giants. Is that true?
Well, I don't even get into any metaphysical speculations in any of my books. I have a lot of.
Have you heard this?
Oh yes, I've heard it many times. Yeah, I've heard it many times. Usually things like that I tend to avoid in my books, not because I'm not a believer in spiritual things or metaphysical realities or what have you. I have a lot of suspicions and philosophical problems with reincarnation, for example. But let's look at it this way. If you look at the stories and allegations about giants, in some cases, in my book, The Cosmic War, I even put in a diagram of some of the archaeological texts from early Enlightenment France, where they're describing giants of 36 feet height. In other words, extremely tall, 6 times as tall as modern man. And you look at these stories, you find stories of giants in North American Indian lore and in South American Indian lore. You find it in the Greeks. You find it all over the place. And to my mind, when you've got that kind of lore, there's been academic attempts to explain it away and say, well, these people were just really mixed up and they were looking at big, huge bones of dinosaurs and concluding that these were giants. Well, I don't think so, and the reason I don't think so is that human rationality is remarkably consistent through the ages. I don't believe the people back then were as dumb as the dumb people now say they are.
Right. No, I agree with you there.
So let's look at giants. In my book, The Cosmic War, I pointed out that if you look at Dr. Van Flander's exploded planet hypothesis, he believes that the asteroid belt is the remnant of an exploded planet that occurred millions of years ago in this solar system. And this is actually a hypothesis that, if you look carefully enough at some of the ancient texts, seems to be corroborated rather nicely. But he hypothesized that this planet would have been about approximately 2 times the mass of the Earth, and that it was a solid water-bearing planet. Now, if you can imagine that this planet was inhabited by intelligent humanoid life forms, then in that kind of higher gravity, one of 2 evolutionary possibilities comes to mind. Either that people in that higher gravity, 2 times the mass of the Earth is going to be like experiencing somewhere between 2 and 3 Gs as a constant experience. So either they're either going to be very short people and kind of flattened out, or conversely, they might be very tall people with immense bones and a very heavy bone structure. So, in that sense, the story of giants makes a little sense to me. So I don't think we have to go to speculations about reincarnating souls and all of that stuff.
Right.
That's certainly there in the lore. I'm simply trying to look at it from
scientific.
From the standpoint of bones and ancient stories and how the two might go together.
Right. No, that's interesting, because I remember reading this once too as well, that during the time of dinosaurs, of course, the oxygen levels may have been different, the air, and maybe humans at that point in time were just much larger because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if they existed at the time of dinosaurs at all. I mean, there's always been that kind of crazy evangelical fundamentalist school that says that the Earth is about 4,000 years old or what have you, and that dinosaurs are not that old and that they shared the earth with mankind. Well, I'm not of that school.
Right.
You've got Richard Thompson and Michael Cremo in their book Forbidden Archaeology.
Yep.
It's a wonderful book. If your listeners don't know it, that's definitely a book.
Yeah, we've had Michael Cremo on the show.
Oh, excellent.
Yes.
They present a pretty substantial case that there was some sort of intelligent hominid humanoid life form on Earth before the rise of modern man, and they produce evidence of machined objects that are millions of years old, and in one case they produce evidence of this little coin that was discovered in stratigraphy within Illinois that would have dated it to approximately 240,000 years ago. And again, I thought that was a very interesting discovery because that is yet another little time sequence corroboration of the Sumerian kings list. And you have these little indicators around the world that something may be horribly wrong with the academic paradigm of human prehistory.
Oh yeah.
Wow. So
which is why I'm writing these very weird books. because I'm not satisfied with those paradigms either.
Right. And it's from what I know, you don't base your conclusions off the writings of Zecharia Sitchin either, right?
Well, Sitchin is no, I don't. But Sitchin is certainly influential. One of the things I deliberately started out in the Giza Death Star books was Sitchin certainly had an influence on the formation of that hypothesis, but not in the sense that he inspired the hypothesis in me, but rather that I had always kind of held the hypothesis individually by myself.
Right.
And then when I read him, I thought, oh wow, somebody else is thinking the same thing.
Right.
The reason I avoid Sitchin is that academics have raised some severe problems with some of his translations. Now, I know the academic blizzard of footnotes game very well. It's always easy to discredit someone by claiming that you're an expert in this particular field of linguistics, and he's translated this wrong, and therefore you're supposed to bow before authority and dismiss everything he says.
Right.
So, I know how that game is played. I don't like playing it because I think really it's a case of let's nitpick about the leaves on the tree and not look at the forest. So in the Giza Death Star books, and in the book The Cosmic War, what I did very deliberately was I used English language translations of academics themselves. Stephanie Daly, her Mesopotamian, wonderful translations of Mesopotamian texts. I've used some others that were printed by Yale University. So in other words, I was using academically approved English translation texts, and then just said, okay, let's sit down and read these stories in academically approved translations and see what they say.
Yeah.
So, in other words, let's avoid all this nitpicking about Akkadian and Assyrian and so on and so forth, and see what the stories say. Do they suggest a science? And again, my conclusion was yes, they suggest a science if you read them and are willing to read them in a certain way. Now, the problem, just linguistically, that I have with philological nitpicking is that anybody that has studied those languages, Akkadian or Assyrian and so on, will tell you, and you can actually Google this term, that these languages make heavy use of a phenomenon that academics call paronomysia, P-A-R-O-N-A-M-I-S-I-A. Paronomysia is simply the idea that these ancient languages constructed their ideograms with a deliberate multi-layered symbolic complex behind them. So in other words, you look at certain combinations of kineograms, and they can mean about 10 different things. And if you stop and think about the 10 different layers of meaning, they're all kind of related analogically to each other. So translation becomes it becomes a very iffy business to begin with. So take that for whatever it's worth. I avoid Sitchin, but at the end of the game, I in a kind of loose fashion, corroborate what he's saying. And basically what he's saying is these texts could be telling us something scientifically true. Where I part company with Sitchin dramatically is, he's got his old Planet X Nibiru thing of a planet careening into the solar system every 3,160 years, and it comes from off the plane of the ecliptic, roars through the solar system. Well, my problem with that is simple physics. If that were the case, you'd see the planets in orbit around the sun showing signatures of the gravitational effect that such an event would have. They'd be bobbing like fishing bobbers on a pond.
Right.
And they don't do that, at least not to my mind. They don't do that sufficiently. The other problem I have... Pardon me?
I'm sorry. I was just compulsively interrupting. I'm sorry. And could it be that it hasn't even started, it's way out in the solar system and it's going to be another 150 years?
No, it wouldn't, because what he's talking about is a cyclical event that has already happened previously in history, and you'd still see a gravitational signature from that event. And I'm sorry, I'm just not convinced of it. It's a particular construction, I think, that he's placed on the text rather than derived from them. The second problem I have with him is that he's thinking in terms of a technology that really, if you stop and think about it, isn't adequate to the scenario he's proposing. In other words, he's proposing rocket ships and nuclear weapons and so on and so forth. Well, rocket ships are, quite frankly, they're just not a practical means for interstellar regular communications between planets. I mean, we can lob a few probes at things, but in terms of the kind of colonization and commercial exploitation scenario he describes in his works, they're just, it's ridiculous. And nuclear weapons, well, if you're dealing with some of the physics that to me seems to be suggested in the text, nuclear weapons are a pop gun. For one thing, you're not going to be able to blow apart an entire planet with them. Which seems to me to be suggested in the text. It seems to me to be capably argued by Dr. Van Flandern. So you're going to have to look for some other sort of technology capable of doing that. And if you've got the technology to blow up planets, probably you've got a propulsion and transport technology that far exceeds rockets. So I have problems of that sort with a lot of what Sitchin says.